All right. So, I know for those who have been following along, we like a couple weeks ago, we talked about how to set up a AWS account, how to set up IAM users, how to set up start EC2 instances, and then the last time we got together, we discussed CloudFormation, and we went over that and some basics of how that worked. I know Warelock did a bunch of homework and found some cool tools and shared with us. So thanks Warelock for that. And that's something we're definitely going to leverage in the future as well. I think that one of them was like Former 2, and then I also want to definitely leverage Chat GPT as well. And I'm hoping Kevin, you're still going to go over that today. Um, so and so what we'll go over today though is I think is one of the most power one of like yeah one of the most powerful AWS services outside of the other ones I discussed, which is AWS Lambda. And then for those that aren't familiar with AWS Lambdas it's it's considered like serverless applications, and pretty much what it is you could run your code without having to spin up like a Linux server or Windows server and having to manage it, patch it, all those kind of things like that. It's in the back end. It's kind of similar to like a Docker container, but it's all abstracted from you. So the whole goal is to make it really seamless and easy for you as a user to leverage. So we'll kind of jump into that. The kind of things we'll work on today with how Lambdas work will be um, in regards to automating pieces of AWS. But just note you can use Lambdas to automate pretty much anything. An example I was talking to Kevin about earlier was using using Lambdas to uh, interface with a Discord bot. So like the day before and the day of our meetings, we can have the Slack bot go and send an announcement to everybody saying, "Hey, check out our Null 404 security meetup group." So that's an example of what you can do with a Lambda, but the possibilities are quite endless. Um, and with free tier, since this is probably good time to go over that, you do get I think it's let's find out actually before I start guessing real quick. So with free tier, here it is right here. You type in the Lambda. Oh wait, I'll launch it.
Or are you sharing your screen, Sean?
Oh, yeah. That's probably a good idea. All right, here we go. All right, you guys can see it.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, you get a million free Lambda requests per month, and the Lambda request can be up to 3.2 million seconds of compute time per month. So every time you run a Lambda, it's depending on how long your scripts take to run. That's what you're going to be charged for. So you get 3.2 million seconds of compute time per month. So if your scripts are really fast and take a half second, then they only take a half second. The requests, you do get a million requests per second or per month for free. But out of that as well, you get up to 3.2 million seconds per month. So it just depends. So you can have a script that takes like a millisecond to run, or you can have a script that takes I think the timeout. Actually, we can look this up. A Lambda timeout. Lambdas can run for only so long, so there are some like caveats to Lambdas. Is it on here? Timeout. So yeah, your Lambdas can only run up to 15 minutes. So those are some of the caveats and catches with Lambdas, where it may or may not work for what you're trying to do. So, but we'll go into that, how to set up a Lambda. What we'll do today, kind of my example Lambda, will be um, spinning up every time. What we're going to automate is when we spin up an EC2 instance, our Lambda is going to go and automatically tag that instance with a specific tag, and that's all we're going to do. We're just going to keep it really simple. So if we go, I'm going to show you an example what that tag is going to look like. So if you go into instances, let me go to this like test instance we have running. Let me go to tags, you'll see this lambda underscore tag, the value is true. That's all we're automating. So an example is when you spin up a new instance. So we have this Kali instance. Oh, actually, let's find. Oh, we'll show this Linux vulnerable one here. This one, um, this is what the default tags you get on an EC2 instance is just the name tag. So this is one that didn't run through my automation, but the one that did run through the automation actually got this additional tag. So, like I said, you can have it do whatever you want. You can have it automatically terminate instances. You can do what like Sponger talked about earlier, which actually it's something I wish I could have demoed, but I just didn't have enough time. But Werelock was talking about, what if I wanted to have my EC2 security group incoming IP address to be dynamically have it dynamically change every time if you're using DynDNS, every time it detects that your home IP changed, and you want to be able to control the incoming security group IP to say, hey, only allow s1nack home IP inbound to my EC2 instance. You can automate that with Lambdas. So those are all good examples. Like I said, you can automate Discord bots. You can automate pretty much anything you can think of that has has an API or doesn't. So we're going to go over the automating of adding tags to an instance. Just remember, we can kind of change this out to have it do whatever we want. I will provide I'll provide the code. And we're going to use Python just because that's the language I'm most familiar with. So I'm going to provide this code. I'll put it into the meetup text channel. Does anybody have any questions before we kind of get rolling? Can everybody still hear me? What's up, Floppy Dobby?
Yep.
All right, cool.
No questions.
So what we'll do is we will create a new function. So, so if you guys are following along, we went to what we did is we're in the lambdas. Just go to lambdas on the search bar, and then we're going to go over to create function on the right hand side, and then we're going to go to create a function name. So I'll call this a EC2 tag lambda, something very simple. And then we're going to choose a runtime. So these are all the different languages that Lambda support. .NET, Go, Java, Node.js, Python, Ruby. And I think you can even use other custom runtimes. Not sure how they work, but that is a possibility, I believe. But for now, we're just going to use Python 3.9. We're going to leave the architecture set to x86 64 as default. And then what we're going to do is we are going to create a new Lambda role, which will be should be the default setting, and we'll leave everything else blank. There's additional settings, but they're a little bit more advanced. We just won't go over right now. So we're going to go create function. Oh, it's taking a long time. Okay, here we go. So we have our Lambda right here. This is just what a default Lambda looks like. And from here, you can type in your code. This is a little IDE development environment, and you can type in your code and you can save it and you can automatically test it from here. There's other ways to do it too, via like command line and things like that. There's a tool called SAM. It's a really cool tool. It's I'll just show you. I'll share a link with it. It's something we could go over later. But what it does is allows you to work from like VS Code and quickly like test your lambdas from like a local Docker container, or just push up your code straight to AWS and test it from there. So it's a really cool tool. So I'll share a link with that. So let me go back to the Lambda if I can find it out of my 1,000 tabs here. Okay, so kind of the first thing we do need to do is we got to set up our IAM permissions. So this Lambda can only do what we tell it can do, and by default, you create a Lambda. You do get a IAM role that's created automatically for it. So if we go and we launch this window to see what's in the IAM role that got automatically generated for the Lambda, you can see it, by default it has access to create log groups. So when Lambdas are ran, the output from the code gets saved in a CloudWatch log group, and I'll show you what that looks like in a few minutes. So it just this default IAM role will give access to write to the logs, but we want to add in some additional information. So we're going to go over to add permissions, and we're going to create a inline policy. And then we're just going to use the visual editor just for simplicity. And we're going to type in EC2. What permissions we need to give it is the ability to create tags on an EC2 instance. So that's why we're going to go into EC2 and add these actions. So I'm going to just type in tag, and you can simply just add the create tags permission to it. And then resource, we're just gonna, for now, just add all resources. You can definitely resource bind this to your heart's content, but just in our use case right now, we're gonna select all resources. If you wanted to get more finite, and actually we can just do that right now. These are the different resources we have, and down here there should be instance, and you can say so pretty much any instance in the account we can tag. And if we go over to the JSON, this is what got generated. So the action is EC2 create tags, and this is for any EC2 instance within our account. So we're just going to go review the policy, and we're going to call this create tag. And then we're going to create the policy, and this automatically gets attached to our Lambda role. So if we come over here and we refresh this page, you can see this little visual thing that will show you what permissions you have. You'll see we discussed earlier we had CloudWatch logs permissions, and now we have EC2 create tags permissions. And then so that's all we need to do for now. The question is like, how are we going to trigger this Lambda when an EC2 instance is created? Because the whole goal is every time an EC2 instance is created, we want the Lambda to be triggered automatically and go and tag that instance. So how we'll do that is we're going to leverage a thing called CloudWatch Event Bridge. So we type in Event Bridge. We'll get this option. We're going to right click and open this in a new tab. And what Event Bridge does, it does many things, but the most popular thing it does is allows you to automate pretty much actions that based off things that happen in your account. So, and what those actions are, for example, CloudTrail events. And I think we went over this a couple weeks ago, but I'll kind of go over it again because this is important. If we go to CloudTrail and hit New tab, CloudTrail pretty much records every API action that happens in your account. So if we in CloudTrail, if we go to Event History, we'll see all the different things that have been happening in our account, that like changes that have been happening. So you can see right here this create function. This is when we created our Lambda function. This creation of a shared snapshot volume. This is something we did earlier where we were creating a snapshot for Kevin's Kali instance. And then earlier we created some test instances. So we had this event called run instances. And if you click on these, you'll see what's in what was recorded. So you can see when this event, my user s1nack at this time ran the run instance API. This is like when you create a EC2 instance, it's the event's called run instance, and you can see the details on the instance that was created. So I used the this is the AMI I used. We created one. We used Kevin's SSH key. It was a T2 micro, yada yada yada. So all this information gets captured in a CloudTrail event. So how do you take these events and trigger a Lambda based off the event? That's where Event Bridge comes in. So if we go over to Event Bridge rule, well, actually what we'll do is I created one already. I'm just going to use it as a demo, and I'm going to pull this over to my other window so I can make sure I provide you guys with the right information. Anybody have any questions? All right. So what we'll do is we're going to create a new Event Bridge rule, and we're just going to call this CloudTrail trigger Lambda EC2 creation. Something very descriptive there. And then we're going to leave everything else default. The rule type is going to be a rule with event pattern. So we're going to go to next, and we're going to go all the way to the bottom, and we're going to create a event bridge rule based off a pattern. So the event source will be AWS services. The AWS service is going to be EC2 because we're going to be triggering off EC2 creations. And then the event type, we're going to say EC2 instant state change notification. Is that the right one? Yeah, that's the right one. Okay, and then the next option will be we want to have it trigger off a certain state. So when an instance is created, it actually goes into a pending state, and these states are actually defined under EC2 instances. So right now, my instances are in a running state, but if we went and, let's say we terminated one right here, and we refresh, you'll see it goes into a shutting down state. I think that's an option, yeah, shutting down. But we're going to use a pending state. Pending state is when an instance is created, and we're going to say it's going to go off for regardless of what kind of instance it is. So this is the event pattern, and I'll share that in the channel. And then we're just going to go to next, and then target. So we're going to select AWS service, and we're going to type in Lambda. So this is what when that event happens, we want to trigger our Lambda function. So we're going to choose function, and we'll have this EC2 tag Lambda. That's the Lambda that we created. And then we're going to hit next. And then we're going to hit next, and we're just going to hit create rule. And then that's it. So from there, we're going to go back to our Lambda instance, our Lambda function. And what we're going to do is we're going to come over and edit the Python, and we're going to print the event. And I'm going to show you how this kind of works. So every time when you want to execute an event, when you want to execute a Lambda, you have to pass event information to the Lambda in the form of JSON, and that's like the input for the Lambda. You don't technically have to pass it anything. You could pass it a null value. That's fine, and you could just, if your Lambda doesn't need any input, you don't have to give it input, and you don't have to give it output either. But in our case, we want to give it input because we want to be able to read the information from CloudTrail by the Lambda. But for right now, we're just going to do an example. So what we're going to do is we put in this line right here, print event. And all this will do is this will print the event data we're going to hand it to the logs. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control S to save, and then we're going to hit deploy. And what this will do is push out these new changes to the Lambda itself. Because right now, if you don't hit deploy, it's just kind of in a staging state. And now we're going to go test the Lambda. So to test it, we're going to create this, and we're just going to call it test. And then by default, there's these like this default JSON value, and I'll just call this test key, and we'll call this test value, and we will just that will be that's going to be the event data we're going to pass it just as an example. So we're going to hit save, and then we're going to hit test, and you can see what this script did is it would print your event, and then it would also return status code 200 and print out hello world in this JSON format, or in a JSON format. This is technically a dictionary, a Python dictionary. So what we got as a response was status code 200 hello, and then we got this hello from Lambda, and then down here, this is the print statement we did, where we printed out the event we passed it. So what we'll do is, just for now, we're going to get rid of this, just so we doesn't gonna get confusing. And we're going to hit deploy, and then we're going to run a test one more time. So you'll see the response was null because we didn't return any information, but we printed our event data, which is this right here. So if we go back here, you'll see the test key and test value printed, and this is going to be important for the next step. And real quick too, to see how our Lambda is doing, like the health of our Lambda, you can see right here. Oh, we haven't got anything yet. Sometimes it can take a few minutes for the metrics to make it to CloudWatch. But to see what are like our logs that are going to CloudWatch logs, CloudWatch is like the metrics health monitoring system with inside AWS, and log groups are just everything, or a lot of things can log straight to a AWS CloudWatch log group. So, like for example, Lambda is everything. Anytime you print anything or create a logging statement or an error, it will get printed to CloudWatch logs. So we're going to go to the latest one, which is at the top, and this is for our Lambda, the EC2 tag Lambda. And you can see in here, if we go and we open it up, you can see this is the output of the logs right here. So you can see this test key is what we printed to the screen. So let's now let's go create a instance and see what gets printed to the logs. So I'm just going to clone one of these Ubuntu instances, and I am going to go over to image and templates and say launch more like this. And we're just going to leave this as default. We're not going to change anything. And we're just going to hit launch instance. So, oh, we got to choose a key pair. We'll just set it to Kevin. All right, and then so we just launched the instance. So that, like I said, every time you do an action within AWS, it will write to CloudTrail. And what we've set it earlier with using EventBridge is triggering our Lambda for every time an instance is launched. So if we go back over to our logs for the Lambda, we refresh. Hopefully this shows up. Okay, here we go. So you can see at 3:03, this is UTC, we have some new data. So you can see at 3:03, we had this data get passed to our JSON, or get passed to our Lambda. And like I said, every event is passed in a JSON format. So we see this is actually the raw cloud trail event data. So you can see the ID of the event. Let's see. Look at we have the account information, the time. Oh, actually, this goes down here. The region, the resource, this is the EC2 instance. So we copy. If we take this, actually, if we copy this, let me go put this up here real quick. see, it's easier to easier. Oh, why is this not easier to read? Hold on. Copy. Let's go. This is a just fix the formatting real quick. Okay, here it is. So this is what the CloudTrail data was passed. So we have this is the instance it's saying that was launched, and the state is pending. And so if we go back over to EC2 and we go to instances and we do a search for that instance, you'll see there. Here's our latest Ubuntu instance, and it's booted up, but it's still running its status checks. So it goes from creation to pending state, and then goes into running when it's up and running. And as of right now, you don't see that we haven't added in the programming for adding that tag yet. So we don't see that additional tag added, just the name Ubuntu right now. So what we'll do is we'll take that data that we gathered, the JSON data that gets passed to the Lambda, and we'll notate a couple things. So we'll see that what we want, because we want to be able to add the tag to the instance, and we'll do that based off the instance ID of the EC2 instance. So to get to that data, we're going to use this will be pretty much converted into a dictionary automatically, and we want to grab the data from the detail key, and within that detail key, there's this instance ID key. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back over to our Lambda and go back over to code. And then what we're going to do is we'll grab that text I pasted earlier with the code in it. Where is it at? It's right here. And I'll go over like what it does. So this is the code right here. Oops, we don't want that timestamp. So what it does is anytime you run a Lambda, it's going to run off the Lambda function Lambda handler by default, and the event data is passed in to this event variable. So what we'll do is we can let it print the event when it comes in, and then what it's going to do is we're going to use Boto3. Boto3 is a Python library for AWS APIs, and it's documented really well. So you can actually come over here and copy this. This is pretty much how this works is Boto3, the AWS Python library, will assume the EC2 service state, and that's going to create a client object. This client object for EC2 will tell it to create tags, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this function, this function takes two items. It takes for under resources, it's going to take an instance ID. So what we'll do is we're going to pass the event data and grab the instance ID here. And if you're using Python library, or if you're using Python, how to take items from a dictionary. You'll let me pull this up side by side real quick. Hold on, to kind of explain how this works. So let's say you wanted to grab the instance ID. So this is the event object, and we're saying gather what's inside the detail key, which is right here, and then we're saying grab the value of the instance ID key, which is right here. And then so what will be returned is going to be this instance ID. So for those that are familiar with Python, that you'll get this more. If you're not familiar with Python, you can feel free to ask me questions later, and I can help you with this. So that's how we're gathering the instance ID. We're also gathering what we're gonna do is we're telling it what tag to apply to the instance, and we're gonna say the value of the tag will be lambda tag, and the value is gonna be true. And we can change this to be whatever we want. We can say s1nack was here. And let's just say, this cool Lambda key. So we can change it to whatever we want. I'll just call this Lambda key though. And we'll just set this to true. And then, like I said, if you want to get more information on what this Lambda, technically it's a Python method for the class client. If we went over here and copy this, we looked up Bodo 3, which is the Python library, and we looked up a crate tag for EC2. We'll get a page right here. The documentation is pretty good on how the Bodo library works. Each programming language has different libraries for AWS. So the one for Node.js will be different. JavaScript will be different. And then also there's different ones for like PowerShell and things like that. But if we come over here in the documentation and we do a search for crate tags, we click on it, you'll see the exact information we just put. And we'll get information on what's required. So, for example, the resources for this action are going to be IDs of the resources, and the tags, the key and the value that we presented earlier. So what we'll do is we'll hit deploy, and what we'll do now is go over and create another instance. We'll launch the instance. We'll just do this from scratch, and we'll just call this s1nack Lambda test, and then we're going to just create a free tier instance. We're going to leave this all default because it doesn't really matter. We'll change the key pair, and then we're just going to hit launch. And then when it launches, we'll get this link straight to our instance. And then if we click on it, we go to tags. You'll see that tag has been automatically added to it based off all that work we just did. If we come back over to the Lambda, and we go over to monitor, and we open up the CloudWatch logs, we'll look at the latest log that pops up here, and you'll see, if we open this up, you'll see the that event data was passed to it. And then it did what we wanted to do based off the code that we wrote. And pretty much all the code does is Bodo 3 is a library that abstracts the complexities of writing APIs from scratch. So you could write the API commands by scratch using like URL lib or things like that. But the Bodo 3 is kind of an abstraction layer that helps kind of speed things up. And then under monitor, you can see like the health. You can see that things were actually executed successfully as well by error count. You have errors and you have success. And seeing here, we only have successes. We have 0 errors. So you can get ideas of how many times this thing was executed. A duration. So this was how many milliseconds? It was I think it converts to 2,000 milliseconds. Yeah. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. That's how lambdas work. There's a lot more to it. But this information can get you a long way. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this, I'm trying to figure out, like, are you just showing us like how, if you wanted to get into Lambda, like how it would, just how Lambdas work sort of in general, what you have to do to set it up, set one up, a Lambda function? Or is it, I mean, because I'm just like, maybe I'm getting lost in the weeds here, because I'm looking at like what you did, right, which is to tie it to the creation. You're launching a new EC2 instance, and you're saying, okay, when this launches, I want you to run this code to do something, right?
Yeah.
Are you talking about like use cases, Warlock? Like why
Yeah.
is Lambda? Yeah. So at least the the use case that I've faced, or the issue that I've had with AWS, is when you spin up EC2 instances, they're just named with the I name, the I dash, whatever the number is. So like you tag them to essentially, like if you have like a dev stage prod environment, you could tag your EC2 instances with like dev stage prod through this Lambda. Is that correct, Sean?
Yeah,
Ye-
but I think he's asking about like what are outside of just using like CloudWatch events, like how else can we trigger things?
Yeah.
How
I,
else we can trigger lambdas?
well, so what I'm saying is like if you just spin up an EC2 instance, but you
Yeah,
had this Lambda function in place, right? And you had CloudTrail watching everything, it would catch it and then run this code to do something useful,
yeah,
using this Lambda function, right? But then if your goal was essentially to like add tags to a system, uh, I mean, like for example, if you're using CloudFormation, you would just tell it what tags it would need to have.
correct. Yeah, this is just one way to do it. This is just one example. Yeah, ideally in a perfect world, you would do everything in infrastructure as code, but this was just an easy example to give. Um,
Okay,
so
so this like the use case, like the thing you're trying to do right now, you don't really care about. It's just an
no,
example.
it's just it was
Yeah,
the easiest example to
and
show.
yeah, Lambda functions. You're illustrating how Lambda functions are compute actions which don't require EC2 instances, right?
Correct.
You're boiling it down to just the code itself, and there's a bunch of languages available.
Yeah.
And then you're saying, well, you've got this code, but it's got to do. It doesn't know when to do. When does the compute happen? Well, it's triggered on some kind of thing happening, right? And so the way that they do it is they call them events. They tie them to a bunch of logs. There's a thing that watches the logs, and that's that. You can trigger the Lambda function to do the thing, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the
Yeah.
thing is. Okay. So this particular use case of creating tags isn't really, it's just an example, right? So if you, for example, wanted to do something different, like adjust a security group, you would use this exact same method, but with different
Yeah.
results.
Yeah. So it's a good question. And since I was like a little limited on time, I couldn't go into like a more in-depth discussion of like how else to execute it. But yeah, this is just one way to trigger lambdas. You can the probably one of the most common ways, but it's a little bit more advanced to kind of show in a demo. I think this demo is a good approach to lambdas. But if you want to get into how else can we use lambdas, a very common way to use lambdas is as a way to as like as a way to work like build your own API, for example. So let's say I wanted a service out there to be able to hit my Lambda, and you pass it some kind of code, just like an API, and it will do something. It will you ask my Lambda what the weather is, and my Lambda will give you back the answer. And you can do that via like API gateway, where you add in a API gateway in front of your Lambda, and what will happen is you can hit the API gateway, publicly from like anywhere in the world, or you can set it up so it's only accessible from inside your AWS account. Like if you want to have a EC2 instance kind of like hit your Lambda, um, one of the best ways, the most secure ways to hit it is with the API gateway, and you can add in a bunch of like authorization and authentication and things like that to your API gateway, and then it will make sure it passes the correct information over to your Lambda, and then your Lambda can then return back the requested answer. So it's probably one of the more common things that Lambdas are used for. Um, but the option it's limitless. I mean, for example, like if you were gonna have like we talked about a Slack bot earlier, and I haven't, oh sorry, not Slack bot, a Discord bot, and I haven't worked with Discord bots, so I don't know exactly how they work. But what more than likely, Discord, you'd be able to use Lambdas to directly connect to Discord's API server, and you can have it, you can write a code saying, hey, I want to send a notification every Monday and Tuesday at this time of the day to notify my members, like, hey, check out our Null 404 meetup that's happening on later today. And you can do that with a Lambda. We Event Bridge that I showed earlier, where we had it trigger um, off CloudTrail events. One thing you can do is you can actually have Event Bridge. If you come over here, you can actually change the trigger to run on like a cron, and you can have it run every couple minutes or at certain times of the day or things like that. And you can trigger Lambda based off that a time interval. And that's another example. Another thing you can do too is you can actually tie lambdas together, where you can say, you can have lambdas pass data to other lambdas, and those are called step functions. They're really, really powerful, and it lets you have a bunch of lambdas work in. You can have them run. You can have them run in orchestration. And there's a kind of. Let me see if I can have a good example, real quick, of what that looks like. Oh, these aren't really good examples. Oh, this is kind of a good example. So you can have a lambda right here, trigger, pass, do something, and then pass its output to another lambda, and then based off, its input, it could pass the data off to another lambda. So those are called step functions or state machines. That's another thing you can do with lambdas. So there's millions of things you can do with lambdas. And if you ask me like how could I do this with a lambda, I can probably give you a pretty good answer of what you would do with it. But yeah.
So yeah, let me follow it up with a further question. So okay, so if I've got a dynamic DNS service already that's out there, right, and the goal is to have that follow my actual IP address, which can change at any moment, but the authoritative source of like what would know that is my firewall, right?
Yeah.
Because it literally negotiates with DHCP with my ISP, and that's what's going to know. That's going to be the most authoritative source to know what the IP address is and if it's changed, right? So, there's like a bunch of support built into pfSense, and that's the firewall that I use for like a bunch of different dynamic DNS providers. So I just took a quick look. I don't really see in that whole list that they give you anything that says anything about like AWS or anything like that to make it compatible. So it's the idea like you want to start with the what's the authoritative source, and since it's updating some dynamic DNS provider, right, to have the DNS follow this new IP address, I would think I would also want to have something else be aware of that would talk to AWS to push that change out to AWS, but I don't see that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
are you you mentioned cron, but there's like a difference between polling and like difference between pull and push, right?
Yeah.
Like polling versus event driven. So event driven would have to be something sort of smarts on the pfSense side that would tap into an API, but you'd have to have an option. I don't quite see that. So what's the thinking?
Yeah, so how I would do that, and this is an idea I've actually thought of because I have a similar use case, is if pfSense didn't allow you to do that via the GUI options, since pfSense is just a BSD server, you could just run a bash or shell script on the server. pfSense has a CLI or commands, and have it read, what's my public IP address right now, for example, and then have that shell script go and send an API call to your Lambda, which that just go out to the web and then through API gateway and then into your Lambda, and that would be a SSL TLS encrypted connection, and then the Lambda, it'll pass that data in like a JSON format, saying, hey, this is my new IP address, and then that data will get passed through the API gateway to Lambda. Lambda will then, for example, using those Boto3 AWS API commands, those functions, you can have it go and change the security group. So, for example, we look up EC2 Boto3 security group. We go here. We look up security group. Let's see if we can find a good example real quick. So we can do, I think it's going to be probably security group. Let's go up here to the list, update security group rule, ingress right here. Oh, wait, no, that's description, so on. Modify security group rules. So this might be something right here, yeah, where you could, the JSON, the command you'd get, or the function you'd give is modify security groups rules. You'd give it the security group ID, which that would be a static ID that wouldn't change, and then you would give it, the port. If it's a single port, you just do the port, or the, whatever port it is that you want to, have, or you can just have it be all ports if you want it to be, and then you can give it your IP CIDR block, which would be like 192.168.1.1/32, for example, but a public IP address, and that's how you would do it, and then that would programmatically update the security group when the IP address has been changed. That's how I would do it.
So you're talking about like a script that you would get into the SSH shell of your pfSense box, use that to write a script that gets run by what, cron?
Yeah, cron's good one. Have it run like
Okay.
every minute or however you want it.
Okay, so the idea basically is you're still doing the same kind of polling, but you're shifting it from polling being done in the AWS cloud to your firewall.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so one thing I just found in here, in pfSense, because they've got a whole bunch of different providers. I happened to notice one called Custom,
Okay.
and so in Custom they have an update URL, right? So it seems to me that's the logical place. Like if you wanted to have a very simple API to control it on the AWS cloud side, I think you were telling me earlier about how you don't have to use necessarily API, the API gateway if you don't want to if you don't necessarily need the centralized support of authentication for incoming, but you literally just need a very simple, fraction of a full API just for this, attached to this one Lambda function to trigger it, right? And that's the idea of, what was it called again? A Lambda URL?
Yeah, function URL.
Function URL. Yeah. So you got a function URL, which is really just a RESTful API, just a URL, right? That when you hit it, it will literally trigger off this thing to run. And that URL, I think, is what you literally would take and copy and paste it into this update URL field. So that way, when it tracks your firewall, which knows that the IP address has changed, it'll simply just do a RESTful API call to that URL, kicking off this Lambda function, and then all your internal Boto 3 magic will occur. Correct?
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Yeah, and here's
Okay.
I'm showing an example of that feature inside the Lambda called function URL, and you can add it. You can just remove authentication altogether, and it would give you this URL. This would be the URL you'd hit right here.
Although if you think about it, from the perspective of if this controls who gets to SSH into your stuff, you probably would want it to go through some kind of authentication. So function URL, there was an option for some kind of authentication within function URLs.
Yeah, but it's based off IAM users and roles, so that wouldn't really work in your case. That's where API gateway would come in.
Okay, so in the case, so if the idea here is you want to control ingress of who gets to get to SSH on these boxes you create within AWS, right? You want to limit who gets to control that, right? So you literally would need to have something handle authentication. So in this particular use case of this, right, you'd want to use API gateway instead.
Yeah,
the function URL.
Well, the biggest thing is you can add in if you want. You can add in if you wanted to use like no authentication. You can add in to your Lambda authentication functionality as well too, where when somebody passes a JSON string to your Lambda, the Lambda is going to check, okay, is the username and password correct? That's one way to do it. I wouldn't say that's the right way to do it, but
but that would be in the clear though.
Yeah, I think it is encrypted. But yeah, that's something that needs to be. I don't have too much experience with.
You're basically relying on transport layer TLS security.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right on.
Real quick, Kevin, are you all ready to go?
Well, I got most of the stuff set up, but for whatever reason, my shells are not working on the Linux machine. And then I can't SSH into the Windows machine, so that's always fun.
Wait,
I
did
was
you
want to do
RDP?
to validate. Do I have to RDP or can I SSH?
RDP.
RDP into the Windows machine?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a
Okay.
I sent you over the password. Well, I'll give you some more time. Do anybody else have any other questions?
No.
Just I guess as far as just like Lambda functions in general, is this where you can essentially? I know you said it's limitless, but essentially, can you do automatic remediation through here as well? It's just you have to build the issue is, I guess, with automatic remediation, like let's say an EC2 instance is public facing where maybe you only want it private, or an S3 bucket is public facing where you only want it private. Is that essentially you can leverage like Boto to make that change?
Yeah. You could totally do that.
Is there
You can
templates
manually
for
write those rules in Python script.
is there templates essentially for that or public face? I'm sure there are, but
Yeah, I'm sure there are. AWS actually has a project called AWS Char, I think. Let's see. No, AWS remedi. I would recommend like using like AWS. Sorry, no, it's called Cloud Custodian. That actually does everything automatically using Lambdas. But if you wanted to go in a little bit more do it yourself, AWS has this automated response remediation using with Security Hub that they
okay.
call SHAR, and it uses Lambdas. It's kind of a framework. It's a lot of it's you know it's yeah. But this
You
is
still
one
have to
thing you can
build it
do.
out though.
Huh?
You still have to build it out though, I think is the main issue. You have to enable Security Hub through all that stuff, make sure you have CloudWatch,
Yeah.
enable Lambdas, and it's very much like just out of the like you have to set it up from scratch pretty much.
Yeah. If you don't want to set it up from any of this from scratch and you want to like build it your own solution, then that's where your CrowdStrike sales pitch comes in. Or there's a bunch of other vendors that's called Cloud Posture Management, and there's like I can name like 20 different vendors. Like there's Prisma, that's by probably the name of the company. Palo Alto. There's several other different companies. Stacklet is one.
Flameworks.
There's Wix. There's CrowdStrike. But yeah, those are all like out of the box solutions that could do something instead of using Lambdas for like that remediation of possible misconfigurations.
Nice.
But
I got a little bit to add on that. Just a follow-up thing I kind of thought through about the use case of having a security group ingress IP address for SSH follow your real IP address, your dynamic one. As far as like the security stuff and authentication, I don't think that's really necessary. All you really have to do is have the pfSense firewall reach out to that URL just to wake up the Lambda function, and then basically what you've done is you've taken your firewall as the authoritative source of the IP address. It transfers that to your dynamic DNS provider, right, by updating it. And then because that's publicly available, anybody can query it, right? And so the Lambda function, all it has to do is wake up, right? So literally, you're not passing any information at all. No authentication is required. You're just telling the Lambda function to wake up. It queries the DNS, pulls the IP address, and then uses that IP address to update the security group, and that's it.
yeah.
Right? Because because it would know you've pre-programmed it already to know the correct fully qualified DNS name
Yeah.
to look up. Yeah. So it knows what to look up, but it's a matter of public record. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Easy. And it's also directly event driven, right? Because you're using pfSense to basically wake up AWS, right? So there's not a whole bunch of constant polling, no polling at all.
Yeah, definitely one way to do it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's it for me. If anybody has any questions, I can answer them after Kevin